Hey everybody, can you hear me? If you can, let me know in the chat for the folks that are already in here. This is my first attempt at live streaming this, so give me just a second here. All right, let's put that there. All right, we got that going. Go ahead and share this. All right, hey everybody. Thanks for joining the inaugural episode of Radio KBE, with this being my first broadcast. Um, this is going to be called Lakers Desktop. If you guys are familiar with sort of the Ringer and their NBA Desktop thing, this is their sort of thing that Jason did over there. This is sort of similar to what that is. It's just kind of looking over and just kind of talking about Lakers related stuff in a way that's more inclusive of the actual content. I think there's enough people who just sit in front of a camera, and you just got to look and stare at their faces as they give you analysis about what they think. And I thought what would be more fun would be if we actually talked about the stuff that happened as we sort of look through the content and stuff like that. And so for this sort of inaugural episode, this is my first time doing this. So if you've ever seen me on camera before on Laker Central or Late Night Lake Show or Temple of Hoop or just basically anybody I've ever guest podded or guest live stream for, it's pretty much the same stuff. In terms of format, the only difference is that I'll just sort of be doing these live streams I'll be doing these live streams on YouTube just because a lot of people hit me up and tell me that the spaces are fun, and it's nice to be able to do them it's nice to be able to do them every now and then, but being able to see the content or being able to like sort of do it on a different platform where you guys watch other videos, that's just kind of where it's at. So if you're already a subscriber to the channel, again, I'm not a YouTuber, so I don't know how all that stuff works, but if you want to subscribe, feel free to subscribe. I think you'll be able to chat down here at the bottom. You'll be able to use the chat if you're a subscriber. And if not, you guys can submit questions or any comments and stuff like that you happen to get as we sort of talk through some of this stuff. So bear with me, since this is the very first episode. There may be some technical difficulties, but I hope there isn't. I hope it all goes very smoothly, so you guys have a good experience. So regardless, thanks for joining. I appreciate it. And, I appreciate any support that I get from folks who are interested in listening to me talk about the Lakers or, just discussing the Lakers with me. So the thing I wanted to talk about today was this interview that happened with Jeanie Buss and just sort of the stuff that happened, not entirely for this season, but I just kind of wanted to talk about the things that she sort of mentioned and then the tone of the interview and stuff that she had. So what I thought would be cool is if we sort of went through it together and just kind of looked at some of the stuff that they were saying. And then from there, what we'll probably do is we'll take a look at some of the coaching candidates that the Lakers have and just kind of what's gone on with, what coaches are available and sort of what I sort of think may end up happening with the Lakers coaching search and what they're actually trying to target. So let's dive into this interview first. First and foremost, we haven't heard much from Jeanie in a while. And though we haven't heard much from Jeanie in a while, we know that there's been a lot of stuff going on with the front office, whether it's Rob or whether it's, something about Phil Jackson now recently, or if it's something about Magic going on ESPN and saying something. We've heard all kinds of different things sort of go on around this team, but not so much when it came to when it's come to Jeanie Buss. I think the most that she's probably said during the season is just kind of talking about Frank Vogel's coaching job security, and that I think the one thing I remember being said specifically from her is that he wouldn't really be judged for his capabilities this season until the team was healthy. And obviously the team didn't end up being fully healthy, and so that sort of held them back from any real sort of analysis when it came to it. That being said, there's been other stuff that she's probably been part of that we may or may not know about. But this interview is sort of interesting because it essentially it was the most information that we've gotten from her about how she feels about this season, without it being like inserted into some article about somebody else altogether. So I thought that was really interesting. This is very clearly an interview where she wanted to talk about how she's felt about the season and just sort of what the steps are moving forward. And I think the way that this has been presented to fans is very much in a way where they want to make it seem like she's really pissed off, and I think she is to some degree. I think she is pretty mad that they missed it, but I think the way it's being presented makes it seem like it's about luxury tax money and it's about like all kinds of other stuff. And so one of the things I wanted to do is just kind of try to read between the lines of what's being said about this whole interview and what she said. So first and foremost, it's one of the things that she says in this interview is that she talks about just missing the playoffs in general. She talks about spending luxury tax money, and she talks about just the cost of doing business. And one of the things that I think is a good thing that we could take from this article, that I took from this article at least, was that she specifically mentioned that we don't like to be missing the playoffs, and that she understands the fans' anger and frustration. Now, I know that can sound like lip service at times, but if you think about it, that has been the number one gripe. Like that has been the biggest thing like for us as Laker fans for like the past 10 years since she's taken over. Obviously, year two we get a championship. In the LeBron James tenure of year one of Anthony Davis. But since then, Lakers has just been hurt. And the moves on the margins have been sort of what we've talked about a lot. I don't want to get into the luxury tax stuff because the Lakers have paid luxury tax and not that many teams pay luxury tax. They haven't paid as much as like some of the other teams like the Warriors, like the Clippers. But to say that they're not spending is, I don't think that's entirely fair to say to her. But to say about the franchise, I think they're not spending wisely. They're not being smart about their asset management. And I think that is something that is good to hear your owner say. It's good to hear your owner say that missing the playoffs is unacceptable. It's good to hear your owner say that, like the very next sentence that she has right here, when she's asked, even if this eventually means eventually making changes, that's the follow-up question is to, whether they like to be missing the playoffs or not. She says, it's not living up to the Lakers standard if we're missing playoffs or if we're not even in contention. And I think that's something that Laker fans want to see. And they want to be able to hear because complacency is not really acceptable. I think for a lot of the season so far, there was a lot of concern that the Lakers would just kind of stand pat and be okay with standing pat, or they would just sort of rest on their laurels and just kind of turn around and just say, yeah, you know what, it's all right. Anthony Davis and LeBron are hurt. We'll just run it back and try it again. And it's not to say that they're not doing that, but being okay with that was a bit of my concern. And it is good to hear her say that. So, after this part of the interview, there isn't, Jeanie sort of goes on to talk about stuff about her dad, and she immediately goes into like this. It looks like the interview gets phrased where Bill Plaschke is asking Jeanie about like Rob's role, Magic's role, Phil's role, Kurt's role, Linda's role, like all these names that we've heard over and over again be involved with the decision-making process historically for the Lakers, outside of the Jim Buss, Mitch Kupchak era. And I thought one of the things that was interesting about this entire interview is that she was very specifically naming those people and then being defensive or taking a position on those people. But before we get into that, I think another good thing that sort of came out of this conversation, and again, I don't know if all this stuff is lip service. I don't know if she's just saying it to make us feel better, if she really means it, if she doesn't mean it. I would imagine it matters to her because, the Lakers are her business. She makes money from the Lakers. So if the Lakers are bad, that's not good business. That's not good for the brand. That's not good for her bottom line, her family's bottom line overall as controlling owners of the team. And so one of the things that I thought was really good to sort of hear her say, because I think this is something that's been sort of a point of contention for the Lakers, for this season is, at the trade deadline, the stuff happening with Rob and Clutch, and then eventually Rich Paul and Clutch having to sit down with Jeanie. This sort of sentence right here, though it's kind of slipped in between the question of about James, about LeBron and Clutch and what their involvement is with the Lakers. I think one of the things that's really good that comes out of this is, regardless of what, LeBron's contract situation, like Jeanie having this stance where she wants to make LeBron happy, not make him happy, but in that sense, but that she is considering, like she understands the magnitude of the situation that she's in. From a business perspective, next season is going to be fantastic for resellers of tickets, for the Lakers themselves when they raise prices and stuff like that for season ticket holders, because LeBron breaking Kareem's record is not going to be just like a Lakers thing. That's going to be an NBA thing. That's going to be like that's history. That's serious history that's being made, and that's going to be a big deal. ESPN, TNT, all these national networks are going to want to try and get that game. I think it's going to take LeBron like 40 to 50 games to do it, but like that game 40 to game 50, those tickets are going to skyrocket in price because people are going to want to be there when LeBron eventually breaks Kareem's record. That's going to be a very historic thing. So hearing Jeanie sort of reinforce that, like taking care of LeBron, making sure that they're prioritizing just kind of his tenure here is a big deal because that is part of what the Lakers brand is. Like that's a big thing. Like Lakers caught a lot of heat for giving Kobe those last 2 years to his contract. But if you're a Laker fan, you understand that like nobody was coming to the Lakers while Kobe was there. Like they just weren't. Like Kobe was a maniac when he came to his expectations, and his work ethic allowed him to be that way. But at the same time, not every free agent that came to LA, we know that with Dwight, we know that a little bit with LaMarcus, not every single person that came to that free agent that wanted to come to LA had that same attitude. Some guys were interested in coming to LA for that glitz and glamour and stuff like that. So Lakers weren't going to get free agents like that. And so when they eventually made a decision and they understood, look, if we're not going to be getting free agents until Kobe's gone, then we'll take care of Kobe because he's deserved it. He's brought 5 rings. He's played here for 20 years, that sort of thing. So there was a business decision that was made in regards to that. Now with LeBron, he's still spectacular. He is an incredible player. I don't know when he's going to slow down, but it's very clear that there's a little bit of an athletic decline with him. And then on top of that, it's he also is going to he's not getting calls at the rim the way they used to, and so there's a little bit of stuff working against him. But he's still a spectacular player. He could have very easily led the league in scoring this season had he had been healthy. And it's very clear that if you can get a guy who can be sort of the primary playmaker for the team, LeBron can play off ball and still be a very effective player. And that's something that I think the Lakers are going to be very they're going to be paying close attention to because I think they want this version of LeBron that's kind of running up and down the floor, scoring with ease, getting really high shot quality. But obviously they need him to stay healthy, so you can't really expect him to play both ends of the floor for 82 games. You want him to stay healthy for the 16 games that you need to win in the playoffs. So it's good to hear Jeanie sort of entrench herself in LeBron yet again when it comes to it. And so then the conversation kind of shifts from that small blurb about how much clutch is involved to the people that are actually supposed to be tasked with what's going on with this team. And it's you can see right here in this sentence where she said the heartbreak must end now, and that basketball operations folks must be the ones to end it. Now, if you have listened to anything I've done in this space, on somebody else's podcast, even in tweets, I've caught a ton of headache from other people, being called a player stand and stuff like that. And it's specifically because I'm trying to steer the attention to the front office. Players play basketball. They try to make things work to the best of their ability within the nature that they have. Coaches have their own schemes. They have their own coaching style. They have their own preferences. But it's the front office that has to be able to marry all those things in a way that works, that makes sense. And it's very clear that our front office didn't do a good job doing that. They didn't respect that process, or they didn't take it seriously, or they just misevaluated what the actual fit was between the roster and the coaching staff. Some of that has to do with financial influence too, which involves Jeanie. But that's a big part of everything. Like the front office has to be responsible, and for a lot of this season, nothing has been talked about. Nobody talked about the front office like that. Some of the fans did for sure on Twitter, but nobody in the front office talked about it like that. Like nobody was talked about like Rich Paul's job is Rob Pelinka's job is on the line. It just wasn't talked about like that, and that's one of the things that was frustrating to listen to because players were being attacked. And this is not just Russ. This is DeAndre Jordan. This is Avery Bradley. This is Kent Bazemore. This is Wayne Ellington. This is Carmelo Anthony. Like, these guys were being asked and expected to do things that they had never done in their career, or they were well beyond their capabilities. Like, at some point, I can't get mad at DeAndre for being bad with the Nets, the Lakers, and the Sixers if those teams are the ones that are going to, like, if they're not watching the tape. If they're not watching and saying, hey, you know what, this guy, you can't roster this guy. Nothing against him as a person or what he's been at in his career. It's just he's not you. There's alternatives that are better, who can be more productive, and that's a front office thing. And I think this front office really misevaluated those two core things: the coach, his tendencies, and the roster, obviously. And then there's another part of this that neither the coach nor the roster have anything to do with, and it's just asset management. It's salary cap management. Like, this is all stuff that, Laker fans will always talk about all the time. And it was very interesting to see. Jeanie sort of. Not only did she sort of defend to some degree the folks that were in the front office, but she also turned around and sort of. The conversation was actually about them. So she didn't shield them from criticism, right? And so when we continue reading on in this write-up from this interview, one of the things that I thought was really interesting to hear is Pelinka gets mentioned a lot in this article. These next three paragraphs that we have right here, it's all about Rob Pelinka. It's all about him making sure that he makes the right decisions, and him making sure that read the words that she's using to describe him, right? Like, she's saying he is a person that is extremely smart, extremely strategic. Everything he does is thoughtful and with purpose, and that she has complete confidence. Now, for some of us, we may think that he may not be all of those things, and there's obviously stuff out there about just kind of who he is and how he is as a person, and how he is as a GM and all that sort of stuff. So I won't get into that. But again, the interview is putting his name out there. Now we're like, the boogeyman is talked about in the open. That's the part that I think I took away from this interview that I thought was really good. Like her specifically mentioning him by name, saying that she thinks he has all of these qualities. Like, now he has to be accountable for that, right? Rob wasn't accountable for it all season. He was accountable in his exit interview, but now he has to be accountable now. And I think that is an important sort of turning point in what's gone on with this front office, because they've managed to avoid it. And that's something that I think, it's not something that bothers me, but it's most definitely something that I think should have been more of a conversation, but just wasn't at the time. And so what I'm hoping that ends up happening is, because now it's been discussed so much, and because he's been mentioned so much in this process, and now that Jeannie sort of put the onus on him, I'm hoping that what ends up happening is, we get better accountability, we get more thoughtful decision making, and we get sort of a better result, a more thoughtful roster construction and coaching search and whatnot. And so, like, as we continue on, the very next thing that just kind of Jeannie talks about after she talks about Rob's involvement in his decision making process and that sort of thing, is the Westbrook conversation. Like, at some point, Jeannie mentions, Jeannie's asked by Bill, like, what's going to happen with Westbrook and how does he fit into the roster? And I thought she said something that even I've said. Like, I think it's the smartest thing. It's the smartest way to go about doing this. And it's just, she just turned around and said, look, we have to figure out who our coach is first. Like, everything that happens with this team this season is going to be dictated by this upcoming season. It's going to be, like, the coach has to make sense. And if the coach doesn't make sense, then we'll just run into the same situation that we did before, where the coach and the coach and the roster, like they don't mix. And so the coach has to make sense within the schemes that this team wants to run. And look, to be honest, like the coach has to be able to make Anthony Davis work. The coach has to be able to make LeBron James work. Like it just has to work, because if it doesn't, you're just gonna run into the same thing again. If Russ is on this team or not on this team or whoever's on this team, like you have to make all the pieces work, and that involves having a scheme and having a style that's modern, that makes sense, that's considerate of the fact that LeBron's going to be 38 years old. That's considerate of the fact that Anthony Davis has an inconsistent motor, like when it comes to attacking the rim, like, and he has a style of play where he'll play hard sometimes, and then he'll have stretches where he doesn't play hard sometimes. So that kind of stuff all matters. It's not just something that can be fixed. It's something that can just be glossed over by picking the right players or forcing him to have to play with other players. And so, I thought she gave a really, really good answer in regards to that. And so now we get on to two other individuals that I know draw the ire of most of Lakers Twitter and most of Laker fans in general. And that's Kurt and Linda Rambis. It's very clear that they are very close to Jeanie. They are family friends to Jeanie, and they work in varying capacities. Jeanie sort of made it clear that Linda's, in this interview, that she has nothing to do with the basketball parts of stuff, and she's more of like a person that's there to help new coaches or new players transition to LA, get used to the lay of the land and stuff like that, which makes a ton of sense. I would imagine every front office has somebody like that that does that sort of responsibility. But again, like just like the Rob Pelinka thing, just like her addressing the thing I can appreciate is Jeanie directly mentioning these people, not sort of waffling around the answers, like taking ownership, pardon the pun, and just kind of like speaking on the people directly, right? Same thing with Kurt. Like whatever, I don't have very glowing thoughts of Kurt because I'm fully aware of just kind of how not good he was as a coach. But all these people that she's talking about in the interview that are part of her inner circle, like they won a championship 2 years ago. And even before last season, like they were a very dominant defensive team. And obviously injuries hurt this team, and they looked poised for a repeat. Had the injuries not, or at least a contention for a repeat, had the injuries not sapped them. And then obviously we went in a very different direction this season. So, like, her confidence in Kurt and the role clarification for Linda is not a surprise. And I don't know what level of accountability she's going to have with them. But I will say this, that now that their names are out in the open, the owner themselves the Lakers owner herself has said their names out in the open. There's no mystery about it, right? There's no who's behind the curtain, who's the person that's really making the decisions. It's very clear that it's a very collaborative process. One of my biggest gripes that I had with this front office is I didn't think there was enough basketball minds that were actively part of the conversations. I know Jesse and Joey, they're really, really good at scouting. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you know how to construct a roster or that you have the relationships to construct a roster. But that does mean that you have some basketball minds. But is Rob a basketball mind? I don't know. I'm not sure. Is Kurt a basketball mind? Like, he's a former player, but he wasn't really a great coach, so it's sort of mixed results. But again, just 2 years ago, they won a championship. So there was a process somewhere in there where everything sort of made sense, because it's not like they stumbled into a championship. They were a dominant regular season team, and then they were outright, even more dominant in the playoffs as well. So there's got to be something there that was actually working. And so, from this point in the interview, like, we go from talking about LeBron to Rob to Russ to Kurt to Linda, which now sort of brings us to two characters that got added to this conversation, to the collaboration, which I don't actually think are new to the conversation. I have no reason to believe that Magic Johnson and Phil Jackson haven't already been part of this process from like the very beginning. Like I know Mark Stein reported that Phil Jackson was going to now help the Lakers, do the evaluation process with the coaching search and stuff like that. But I don't think that's a new development. I think that's something that's something that's been there. That's something that was always going to be there. And I think it's something that it has been there quietly. Magic Johnson went on First Take earlier this year when he was talking about the DeRozan thing. And he was the one who said that it was DeRozan's agent that reached out to him that he then connected to Rob. So very clearly, it's not as if Magic is not part of this process. Like, he's very clearly part of this process. Maybe he's not as involved as he was before, but he's not like clueless as to some of the stuff that the decisions that the Lakers have made and whatnot. And so that's something that I don't think is new. I think it's just always been there. Maybe they just have more of a voice now because Jeanie wants to have more of a more basketball minds be part of the process. So I'll be curious to see just sort of how that goes. But again, she's mentioning these folks. She's mentioning sort of her cabinet of, I don't know what you want to call them, her brain trust or whatever, her cabinet of folks. Like she's describing them now like she's talking out loud about them. And the thing that I always keep taking away from this interview is now that you said it out loud, now people will be openly critical of them. Like people will openly say who came up with this decision. And look, it can go either one of two ways. It'll either work out great. The Lakers will it'll make a ton of sense. The Lakers will be really smart about what they do moving forward. Or you could have political warfare. And you could have people doing what they tried to do earlier this year, where they tried to blame Clutch. And Clutch said, hey, we didn't have anything to do with this, when it came to the Russell Westbrook acquisition. And you could get misinformation and it could lead to more drama. Who knows? But obviously, as a Laker fan, we're hoping for the better. And then eventually, after Jeanie sort of talks about just kind of Phil and just his involvement, how she doesn't like that, they keep being romantically linked to each other. It's a professional relationship, that sort of thing. I think this part again, where she sort of reiterates the stuff about LeBron and the stuff about like just kind of her wanting to make sure that she ushers his tenure here like in the best way possible. I think that's a big deal. I think that means a lot, not only just to the franchise but to the fans too as well. I think that means a lot. And this line right here was really important. I think her saying this out loud was a really important thing to say. And one of the things that she says when it comes to this is, one of the things that she says in this interview is just this line right here. She doesn't say it, and Plashke writes about it, paraphrasing her, just kind of her intention. But this thing where she says, then there's this, Plashke writes, then there's the guy who may have more influence than anybody. And Buss will absolutely not apologize for listening to LeBron James. Like, that's a big deal. That matters. Because player buy-in, even though, LeBron has openly said that, he may sign off on certain things or he may agree with certain things, he's not the person who makes the ultimate decision. But player buy-in matters. Because we're trying to win a championship, and to win a championship, you have to have players that buy into whatever the process is. And for the most part, LeBron has. And so I think one of the good parts to hear is that there isn't contention from that standpoint. Because she could have literally said anything that would have made this a much more ominous sort of conversation. It'd be much more dangerous sort of conversation. I can imagine, fans of LeBron would be very unhappy if she didn't say anything other than, you know, uh, we want LeBron here and we think we can win a championship with him, which is what she says a little bit later. So one of the things that I think is also interesting when it comes from here is just sort of this next part where she talks about LeBron's contract. I don't think the Lakers are going to not offer LeBron an extension. I think they're going to offer his extension. They'll give him the choice of whether he wants to take a 1+1 or play out his contract or just take a +1, whatever it's going to be. But I think one of the things that's important, just as Laker fans, to sort of see is just this thing here where she says, look, if LeBron wants to leave, whether it's this summer or after his contract expires next year, it'll be of his own volition. Like, it's LeBron's choice. Nobody's going to try and force him into a certain situation. I'm sure he's going to take a look at the landscape of what the team looks like. I'm sure his family will be involved with that decision. I think he'll consider his health. But the Lakers aren't going to be the reason that they push him out. You know, if his needs are met or if they accurately understand just kind of what they want out of him. So it's I think there's going to be there's been a lot of speculation about it, but it's just, he can go wherever he wants. And I don't think the Lakers are going to feel any type of way about it. They'll just thank him and he'll just sort of move on. And the irony is that the person that's interviewing Jeanie, Bill Plaschke, he doesn't like LeBron at all. So it's just weird. I don't know why why she even gave him this interview, but it's just funny because she's interviewing a guy who doesn't like him, could care less about what LeBron does next season. How LeBron ends his tenure with the Lakers and feels about the Lakers as he ends his tenure is a big deal. And LeBron said it towards the end of the season that he wants to finish his, he wants to try and win a second championship with the Lakers and continue to win and continue to play in LA and stuff like that. So I think that's important that both the owner and the player said the same thing. It's just when you keep reading through this. When you keep reading through this interview, when you keep reading through this article, you see tons of stuff, about just kind of how much Jeanie cares about the fans, how much Jeanie cares about the Lakers, how much Jeanie cares about like LeBron, how much she cares about making the playoffs. Like, again, much of what she is, much of what the Buss family is tied to this team. Like, if the Lakers are bad, like, the family looks bad, like in the sense of whatever happened that season. Obviously, they were one of the winningest franchises in the NBA, so they'll never actually look bad. But like that's a big thing, like that's a big deal. And one of the things I remember I tweeted out a while back was that like when you have bad product, like when the roster doesn't match the coach or it just looks bad and you're missing the playoffs and then your losses are really ugly. And there's bad body language and there's, not really that many positive moments. It's the people that suffer the most are the fans. The fans are the ones that suffer because they pay for the tickets. They're the ones that show up there. And whether you think basketball is entertainment or you treat this team like it's religion, like I do, like that kind of stuff matters. And I think that kind of stuff matters to Jeanie a lot. And I think this interview was nice in the sense that she spoke and just kind of relayed to us that like what's important. But the other thing that I think is also important is she kind of put it out there. Like these are the people that are going to be involved with fixing this team. This is how involved they are. This is how involved Kurt is. This is how involved Rob is. Magic. This is how involved I am. She mentions over and over again that she's a collaborator. She doesn't just go and make decisions blindly herself. Like, there should be no confusion now about who's involved in fixing this team, making the decisions. Whether they work together or not, or they're effective or not, remains to be seen. But like, this is up to them to figure out. You have to figure out what you want to do with Russ. You have to figure out, depending on what LeBron does, how you're going to build this team out. You have to figure out what you have to do to keep Anthony Davis healthy. last season a guy ran into his knee and then he landed on another guy's foot. You can't do anything about that, but you have to be prepared for that because it's not 2 seasons, almost 3 seasons, including the championship season, because he was getting nicked up here and there that season. Like, you have to be prepared for all these scenarios. The Lakers shouldn't be surprised by anything else that sort of happens with the two superstars. And look, LeBron's 38. Like, there has to be a reasonable expectation of what you can expect out of him. He can't play center. And Carmelo Anthony is not a good backup center. He's never played that position in his life. Like, we can't be doing stuff that's just silly and that jeopardizes the health of our players or puts players in positions to, for non-injury reasons that is not to their strengths. Because then what ends up happening is that the fans just blame the players. They don't, and then the players get defensive, and they're looked at as non-useful, and it can affect their dollars. Like, Avery Bradley he shouldn't be out the league. I'm sure there's a team out there that could use him, but the way that he was being used with the Lakers probably might make other teams think that he shouldn't be a player in the league. When there's actually some other guys that were on the Lakers roster for quite a while that probably shouldn't be in the league. And so that's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. Like, the front office has to be real smart about how they go about it. And we'll cover that in a different stream. But, for this sort of inaugural test run of Lakers Desktop, I wanted to just kind of go over this interview and just kind of talk about just the different things that have been going on with this team. And then just kind of what my interpretation was of what went on with Jeanie, this interview with Jeanie. And I don't think everything's going to be fixed overnight. I don't think this interview is going to help fix everything overnight, but I think one thing it does help is it allows us fans to just kind of have more clarity. Like, we get a better understanding now of like who's actually involved with this process. And look, there's been public spats between Magic and Rob, and we know about the comments that Phil has said about Clutch. I know there's a tweet earlier that Bill Plaschke put out, a completely unsubstantiated thing, but he put out saying that, Phil has explored Phil wouldn't be against trading LeBron. Like, there's going to be silly stuff like that said all the time. But hearing the owner say certain things and reinforce the things that we as fans want, which is we want to contend. We don't want to miss the playoffs. We don't want to alienate our best players. And we're not going to turn this into some political soap opera. Like, the focus has to be on basketball because that's what the fans care about. We want basketball, good basketball, winning basketball. And I think, at least to some degree, this interview gave us some clarity and it gave us an idea of just kind of the urgency behind fixing this situation and who's going to be held responsible for fixing this situation, regardless of how we feel about how these folks sort of defend, how she defends other folks and whatnot within her kind of circle of trust. So, the Lakers coaching search has been pretty extensive. I was planning on covering it on this broadcast, but it's been 45 minutes, and this is much more tiring than I expected it to be. So, I appreciate the folks that join. I appreciate the folks that listen. If you enjoy it, like it, subscribe it, share it, watch it, whatever you decide to do. I appreciate it. And, for the folks that were able to join me for the live stream, this inaugural live stream, I hope I came across clear and you guys were able to see my screen. As I get a little bit better at doing this, hopefully things will be a little bit smoother and it won't take me that long to load it up. So if nothing else, I'll see you folks on Twitter on the timeline, and I appreciate you for joining me. So thanks for joining for this episode of Radio KBE and Lakers Desktop.